Yeah. Okay. That's what I said. No, COVID. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I told one. Then told me. Big hard to hear me. That's true. Okay. 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 Yeah, understand. Understand. Thank you. Amy.
Are these for us or are these not total from So I'm sure that this because there's things.
Pardon?
Good to go.
What's wrong, Old
No.
Randy?
I think.
What did he say? Oh, Randy, he gave a thumbs up. I think we're ready to rock and roll.
Do you want us to turn the microphones on?
They're all-
They are. Oh. Plan, can we elect you for secretary again tonight?
He understands being recorded, so you don't have to be detailed. Okay. Good.
I'm so used to my everyone. Ready? It says 7 o'clock, so I'd like for us to start promptly this evening. First is a declaration of a quorum. We do have a quorum for the benefit of those in the audience who do not know who is who up here. I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, starting at the far end of the table.
John Clark
And
from
your name?
Sutherland.
Sutherland.
Lynn Dowling from Innisbrook.
Randy Swan, Hunting Creek.
Al Bensfield, Smithfield Green.
Paul McDaniel, Winning Creek.
I need a motion to elect a secretary among us to keep the meeting minutes for tonight. Do I hear a
So
motion?
moved.
Pardon?
So moved.
Okay, who?
Lynn.
Lynn, okay. Have a second. All in favor, aye. Thank you. Motion passes. Lynn will serve as the secretary tonight. Second, Dennis Riggs, who serves on the Code Enforcement Board, is unable to be with us this evening. However, we have Paul McDaniel, who is designated alternate. Do I have a motion to recognize Paul as standing in for Dennis Riggs tonight and having full power of Dennis Riggs as a board member?
Motion.
Made, okay.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, then tonight, Paul McDaniel will be acting on behalf of Dennis Riggs for the board meeting. We also had a board orientation session because we had many new board members. I would ask you to look in your. You can't hear? Okay.
Yes, you speak a little louder, please.
It's a little closer and see if that helps. Is that better? No,
Is it on? Tap it, says.
it says green.
Mask.
They said they can't hear me. Oh, okay. So this is not broadcasting in here. Now, can you hear me through the microphone? People in back are shaking their heads no. Okay. I'll just, I'll leave the mask down and just speak louder at that. Okay. There are notes in your binder from the orientation session last week. If you've had a chance to look over them, they're fairly brief. Do I hear a motion to approve the notes of the orientation, Code Enforcement Board orientation last week?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. We are here tonight for the Code Enforcement Board Case 21-11-1, violation of nuisance ordinance 9203G, located at 7513 Rockingham Road in Prospect. We will have an opportunity for the board to hear from the city and from the resident. All of our comments need to be addressed to whether the citation that was issued by the city complies with the Prospect ordinances and the KRS laws, as when we take our oath for serving on this board, we promise to uphold the code of ordinances of Prospect and its laws, as well as that of the Kentucky Revised Statutes, because we cannot pass anything that would surpass or would supersede the authority of the state. The Code Enforcement Board may not necessarily issue a finding tonight at the conclusion or adjournment of this meeting. If so, it will reconvene and come back to make its findings or to complete its study. Board members may have questions of the presenters, and I'm going to ask them to ask the questions at that time to clarify, so it has a material impact in other information that you're sharing, that we have addressed that. Board members, if you will, want to question the presenters, if you'll just raise your hand so they know to pause and give you an opportunity to make your question or comment. Presenters are asked to address the Code Enforcement Board. You are here to present to us, not to each other. Does everybody understand the proceeding so far?
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Gorman. I'm the city attorney, and tonight I'm the attorney for the Code Enforcement Board. The Kentucky Revised Statutes indicates how this meeting will proceed. We do not have to follow the rules of evidence, and we will not, it's not a real technical legal proceeding where you would have people objecting to this and that and whatever. What it does say is that we have to provide due process. And so we will do our best to provide due process and not prejudge the case from our standpoint. The only thing that from a rule of evidence standpoint that I see now that you may want to consider is in a arbitration or in a lawsuit, you have what you call separation of witnesses. And what that's about is a lot of times lawyers will want the witnesses to be separated so that if you listen to what somebody says, it won't give you an advantage when you get up and speak. I frankly, for this informal proceeding, don't recommend that. I don't think it's necessary. But if there's anybody at all that objects to that, we ought to settle that now. If anybody wants to ask for a separation of witnesses, I would think we ought to do it. But in the absence of that, I think we do not separate witnesses. Any questions on that? Any questions on anything from a legal standpoint? Okay, thank you, Randy.
We'll call on the city first since they issued the citation. Chief Sherrard is going to present, and
Okay.
Rick Wilson, who is the code enforcement officer, is also present. Chief, if you will raise your hand.
I will.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Is Rick going to be making any comments or answering any questions?
If he's asked questions, he will.
Okay, well, if so, then we'll swear you in at that time. Ms. McGrail, when we get to your presentation, then I'll do the same.
Okay. Can people go back to me, okay? Before we get into the nature of the complaint and how we got started with all this, I think I'm just going to go over the ordinance and the statute to just lay the groundwork, if that's beneficial to everybody. The chapter in the Code of Ordinances that we're dealing with is Chapter 92, which falls under nuisances. And the adjoining statute through the state, KRS, the one that would be relevant in this case would be Chapter 411.550, which would be the determination of a private nuisance. That is also referenced as a statutory reference in the nuisance ordinance here in Prospect. And under the definition of nuisance in Prospect, it says that it's either enumerated in chapter 92.03, and I'll get to that in a second, or is similar in intensity and effect as those conditions listed in 92.03, which essentially interferes with comfortable enjoyment of life and property of others. So it can be relatively all-encompassing. And then there's a definition of what rubbish is and what scrap metal is in that definition section, the same as nuisance. Under section 92.03, they describe the conditions which could be declared as nuisances. For example, there's dangerous buildings would be section A. Section B would be dangerous trees or stacks adjoining a street. Section C would be the existence of rubbish on a property. But also under that section, there is a portion that states that waste material which endangers the public health, welfare, or safety, or materially interferes with the peaceful enjoyment by owners or occupants of adjacent or neighboring property or the city in general. This shall also include any condition which provides harborage for rats, mice, snakes, or other vermin. There has been part in a complaint that states that that could be a condition here. That's the only reason I mentioned that portion of the ordinance. There's the next section is section D that states noxious odors or smoke. The emission into the surrounding atmosphere of odors and stenches, dust, smoke, and other matter which renders ordinary use or physical occupation or peaceful enjoyment of other property in the vicinity uncomfortable or makes it uncomfortable or impossible. That's one section. The next section is noise. Section F is storage of explosives. And then section G, which was the one cited here, it shall be unlawful for the owner or occupant of any property within the city which faces or abuts on any city street to permit any grass or weeds or any vegetation whatsoever not edible or planted for some useful or ornamental purpose to grow or maintain such premises as to exceed a height of 7 inches or to emit any unpleasant or noxious odors or to create a visual hazard at any intersection or roadway. Any grass, weeds, or other vegetation growing upon any premises in the city in violation of any of the provisions of this chapter is hereby declared to be a nuisance and detrimental to the health, safety, cleanliness, and comfort of the inhabitants of this city. And then the next portion of it basically states that the owner, tenant, or party in control of that premises, whether vacant or occupied, shall remove, trim, or cut grass, weeds, vegetation, or whatever in violation of that. Let's see. As in the case here, when grass, weeds, or other vegetation exceeds the height of 7 inches as described in this section, the owner shall be given notice in accordance with 9204 and heretofore to mow said lot to a height no greater than 4 inches. See, the next section of the nuisance is open wells. Then there's trees and shrubbery obstructing streets and sidewalks. The next section involves the keeping of animals. The next section, K, operation of heavy equipment, the removal of snow and ice, and the disruption of vegetation covering drainage, storage of construction materials. Those are the sections under what we declare as a nuisance. That would be the applicable entire statute. Okay. The Kentucky statute that is referenced in here, that would be applicable in this case is KRS 411.550, determination of private nuisance. In determining whether a defendant's use of property constitutes a private nuisance, the judge or jury, which is the trier of fact, shall consider all relevant facts and circumstances, including the following: the lawful nature of the defendant's use of the property, the manner in which the defendant has used the property, the importance of the defendant's use of the property to the community, the influence of the defendant's use of the property to the growth and prosperity of the community. And the sections that we believe are applicable here, the kind, volume, and duration of the annoyance or interference with the use and enjoyment of the claimant's property caused by the defendant's use of the property. And the character of the area in which the defendant's property is located, including but not limited to all applicable statutes, laws, or regulations. 2, a defendant's use of the property shall be considered a substantial annoyance or interference with the use and enjoyment of claimant's property if it would substantially annoy or interfere with the use and enjoyment of property by the person with ordinary health and normal sensitivities. Okay, those are the, that's the ordinance and the applicable state statute that we would be addressing in this matter. Okay, now we'll get to how we got here tonight. On September 24th, 1921, or 2021. Boy, that would be a long. You feel like I've been around that long. I've been a policeman half that time, I believe. The city received a complaint on the website See Click Fix that stated 7513 Rockingham. There were 4-foot tall weeds in a yard masquerading as a wildlife habitat. Each passing month, it looks like an abandoned property. And there was an additional comment made on the same complaint from that evening. 2 days later, on September 26, Rick Wilson, the code enforcement officer, received an email from Ms. McGrail, who lives at 7513 Rockingham, received an email from Ms. McGrail regarding the complaint, stating to just basically let her know if she was in violation, and if so, which section. That's not all of the email, but that's essentially the gist of it. On October 1st, Rick Wilson received an emailed letter from Mr. Stephen Gerlach, who lives next door to Ms. McGrail. He lives at 7515, and he complained on the condition of the McGrail property, both the front and the rear. And the nature of the complaint of the McGrail property, or the condition of the property, has encouraged moles and skunks to take up residence. The skunks from her backyard have destroyed the Gerlach's backyard. The skunks also interact with dogs, and the smell of the skunks permeates their home. Gerlach believes that living next door to her has diminished his property value. He also commented in his letter that there had been a posting on the Nextdoor app, Ms. McGrail, where she basically rails against the initial complainant, Ms. Susan Shiroji. And basically it was a defensive type posting to the app. On October 5th, Rick Wilson took cell phone pictures of the front yard of the McGrail property. I believe you probably already have those in your packet. On October 18th, there was a regular meeting of the city council, and there were a few residents that were in attendance that evening, and they spoke before the city council and made their complaints on the condition of the property. Mr. William Lays of 7604 Rockingham spoke. I believe it's his wife, Ann Lays, also the same address. She spoke, and she spoke of there being skunks and possums on the property. Leslie Rochelle, I believe that's the pronunciation, 7607 Rockingham. She also spoke and had concern for vermin and coyotes and the threats to domestic pets. Okay. In the days following that city council meeting, Rick Wilson and I spoke with Mayor Evans, and we discussed that we intended to move forward to at least examine the complaint. We looked at the property, determined it appeared to be in violation. And on October 28th, the certified letter was mailed to Ms. McGrail informing her that she was in violation, and she was given till November 19th to comply. On 11/1, Rick Wilson received an email response from Ms. McGrail. I believe she wanted to meet with him later in the day. Rick sent her a response requesting a phone number. It was his belief that he would rather talk to her on the phone than meet her in person. And that was based on the defensive nature of that posting from the Nextdoor app. he thought that an in-person meeting could be a negative situation, and he would rather deal with it on the telephone rather than in person, in case that it could turn out to be something of a confrontational nature. He'd rather deal with it over the phone. Let's see. Also on 11/1, Rick Wilson and I photographed the front and rear property to get the condition on that particular day, since it was just a day or so after we wrote her the letter. The back of her property backs up to the golf course, publicly viewed from the golf course. On 11/2, Rick did speak with Miss McGrail by phone, and there were no issues at all on the phone. She was very pleasant on the phone. And basically, he explained to her how the process would work if a citation were issued. If she didn't pay it, that she could contest the matter and plead her case before the Code Enforcement Board. And here we are. On 11/30, a citation was issued to Miss McGrail by Rick Wilson. Because it was later in the day, she had some things to do earlier in the day. We made arrangements that the citation would be hand delivered, and Officer Joe Manning actually dropped the citation off to her and served her. On December 2nd, I took some new photos because the conditions, with winter setting in, things had changed a little bit because things went dormant, things of that nature. So I took a fresher set of photographs, which I believe that you all have, both the front and the rear property. Also on,
Chief, are you introducing those as evidence?
I think they're already in your packets. They were part of that. I will have some more pictures to give you, and I'll
Have you,
introduce
have you
that.
given them to?
I will. I've got extra copies. I'll give it to her too.
No, they were not given to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to do so.
That's fine.
Do you have an extra copy to give them to her?
I can probably squeeze some out of mine. Just let me get the
I
through.
think we got an extra copy, no?
I'll make sure that she gets them. There's not an issue. She'll get them here in a minute. Actually, on that, the day on December 2nd, as I was taking photographs of the backyard, actually, Mr. McGrail came out and spoke to me in the backyard.
That was not September 2nd.
I didn't say that. I said, no, what was that? December 2nd. December 2nd.
Whatever.
The second, yeah, the second day. Yeah, we spoke in the backyard and just to explain the process and stuff like that. And he just advised me that she was going to have a number of witnesses appear on her behalf, and
She has a number of letters here too, and
Let's,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah,
please
we've
don't
got that.
interrupt the witness.
okay.
Up here. Okay.
I was just, he was addressing a meeting with me.
Okay, on December 3rd, the Code Enforcement Board was notified that there would be a meeting. On December 8th, Officer Mike Thomas hand delivered complete nuisance ordinance and the statute reference in the ordinance. Hand delivered that to Ms. On the 14th, I took photos of the neighboring properties on Rockingham. Properties, two properties on each side of the McGrail home. Two on the left, two on the right, and then the three that are across the street. Just as a reference.
Let's just.
And then earlier today, contact with the, since there was an allegation that there could be an adverse effect
These are mine, not the city's.
to property value for neighboring properties. I did get in touch with a Prospect real estate professional, Mr. David Yunker. Just briefed him on the situation and asked him if he would offer an opinion. And he did so. Later this afternoon, he said he could not be here in person. I asked him if he could, he already had prior commitment. He did go by, view the property, the neighbors, and he did draft an email for me that I received earlier this evening, and I've got copies of that, and I'll provide that to you all for your viewing. And in addition, over the last few weeks, we have seen the city has received a number of letters and emails in support of Ms. McGrail. Copy of those. I believe you may have some. There may be a few more that have come in, and I've got that and present that, all of that to you all for your consideration.
And provide her a copy also, please.
I think she probably
Do
already
you have
has
a
it.
copy of?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think I have a copy, most of them we
Yeah.
can see.
okay.
But essentially in viewing the property or whatever, and looking at the photographs and the times that we were there, the condition of the property, and just looking at it, it just, there's not really a yard, so to speak. The front part of the property is just like all growth. There are varying plants and things like that that you can see it, but when we first viewed it before everything went dormant, there are all kinds of things that appeared to be growing up through other plants and things like that. And a lot of them has appeared to be like weeds and grasses and things like that. But I do know that there were a lot of other plants and stuff like that that were growing, but there also appeared to be significant growth of weeds and grasses and things like that amongst all of that. And I believe that you may have a similar opinion. Look at those photographs from the first set of pictures early on.
Could I ask him one question? How does he qualify? when
No,
we
not
just
right now.
Call things weeds. If he isn't qualified, how can he describe
You,
this? as
you can,
weeds?
you can,
Okay, I'm
make
sorry.
those
Make that point.
Comments,
All right, all right, I'm
Okay.
sorry. It's just.
Okay.
I think I made a statement that they appeared to me to be.
just briefly, as a point of information for the board, each one of you has had an opportunity to review the pictures that were provided. Has anyone had an opportunity to also personally visually inspect the property? I have. Everybody has, okay. Thank you, Chief Farrar.
Do any of you all have any questions for me?
Here's the December 2nd photos. You can give her those. Miss McGrail. That's the December 2nd photo she does not have.
This was the,
Okay, you're putting this in evidence?
yes,
Yes. Okay.
Does she have a copy of that letter from David Younger?
she will. Here, let me go ahead and give you one house.
Let the record show that the documents that the chief are giving to the code enforcement board right now are being put into evidence. Mark that exhibit 1. Is that the first exhibit? You need to.
Oh, okay, so this is exhibit.
Next exhibit will be the pictures that we took yesterday of the neighboring properties.
Okay.
The bottom right-hand corner will be the actual numbers for the homes.
The house numbers.
Houses, there you go.
Thank you.
Let's make your copy for the file
Okay.
and we'll put the exhibit numbers on them. We'll make that exhibit number 2.
Okay. That's very.
Well, I can give it back. These are these are the actual originals because I got the sticker.
That's okay, this works.
Okay.
Chief Sherrard, for my clarification, you said you sent the letter to Ms. McGrail on October 28th,
Yes,
and she was given until November 19th to comply.
correct.
Did she at any time give any indication that there would be a hardship to comply in that amount of time?
No, she didn't respond to that.
Okay. And is there any reason in particular that you didn't bring up that that timeline was chosen?
That I didn't bring up what?
What, was there any particular reason that you selected that particular date or that timeline for
We
compliance?
normally give them 2 weeks,
Okay,
and then so we gave her just a little bit longer than 2 weeks. It actually took us a couple of days to get the citation to her. One day we went by the house, she simply wasn't there. And I think another time we made a phone call, and then we just touched base. She didn't try to avoid the citation or anything. We just had a hard time getting with each other, and that's not something we wanted to leave in the mailbox. So I think at one point, when we got a hold of her, she made arrangements and said, I'll be there at 4 o'clock or whatever.
Okay.
So we had one of the afternoon patrolmen drop it back.
do you have anything else to present or anything else that you want to place in exhibit?
Uh,
I have exhibit 1 as the letter from David
They,
Younger.
there
Exhibit
are
2
letters that were given to the city. I don't have multiple copies of these.
Okay,
But
well,
I'll
you'll-
introduce these again. These
Okay.
were, and I'll just state who they were from. So you'll know whether or not you've got them as we go. Okay, there's a letter from, let's see. Mr. and Mrs. Wicks. That is David's, David and Mrs. Wicks.
okay, so this is exhibit 3.
Thaddeus Fry.
Exhibit 4.
And you all already have this because they've got copies up here. Councilman Joe Bishop. Jesse Subretti.
So this one's exhibit. Right here, 6.
Tavia, Cathcart Brown.
She Mason, Megan,
Exhibit 6, exhibit 7.
Gilchy County Water Conservation District,
Mhm,
Aaron James.
mhm. And you should have one from Professor Margaret Carrier of the University of
Don't have that.
Louisville.
You'll be able to introduce them.
Do you have anything else that you wish to present in terms of exhibits?
Yeah, now you have 3 sets of pictures, correct? The 2 that should have been provided before, and then the one from today.
The
Yes.
ones in the binder here that we were given.
All right, okay. I think that's all.
Okay.
So you gotta make those exhibits also.
Yeah, so I need to make those then exhibit 9, 10.
Take mine.
These that are marked Udale part of,
Yeah, just so both sides understand, as they go into their deliberations, if it's not in the record as evidence, it cannot be considered. So that's why it's important if you have anything and you want it to be put in evidence, that you put it in evidence and we mark it as an exhibit, okay?
just to make sure these are actually part of your exhibits and not somebody's leftovers from a prior board meeting or a forestation board or something. This is part of the exhibit.
That's part of mine.
Okay. This that says Udale
Mhm.
is part, okay,
Part, mine
that
as
will be
well.
exhibit 9 and 10.
Mhm.
This that says GAR
Yep.
is exhibit 11, okay? And the one that says MY here,
It says what?
it says MY,
Yes.
okay, so that will be
Yes.
exhibit 12 then, okay? So the exhibits. Chief Sherrard, are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Do any of the board members have any questions for Chief Sherrard at this time? If not, then we'll proceed with the McGrails to present. Ms. McGrail, are you going to be the presenter?
am,
Okay,
yes.
if you'll just raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I,
Thank you.
first, I want to introduce myself. I'm Jacqueline Hawkins McGrail. I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, and I started gardening when I was 5 years old. I did my undergraduate studies at NYU, where I triple majored in art, anthropology, and psychology. I double majored in geology and physics, and I graduated summa cum laude. I then went to Yale University for my PhD in psychology on a full scholarship, and I received fellowships in research and in teaching. I interned at Albert Einstein College of Medicine at the Bronx Psychiatric Center, where I became interested in mentally ill criminals. My last professional position was as the regional psychologist and a supervising psychologist in the Department of Corrections, State of New York, with supervisory responsibilities evaluating and treating mentally ill inmates, supervising all rehabilitation programs, and performing psych evaluations of corrections officers candidates, as well as testifying in court proceedings involving mentally ill inmates. I became a master gardener in 1994 and a landscape design consultant in 1995 at the University of Maryland. I wrote a garden column for several years for my town in Maryland. I taught classes, I delivered lectures and programs in horticulture, garden design, and ecology. I served as an officer in many horticultural societies and garden clubs in Maryland and Kentucky. I've performed several hundred garden design consultations in both of those states as well. I'm currently, and have been since I moved here 16 years ago, a volunteer at Udell Botanical Gardens, at Creasy Mahan Nature Preserve, and at the City of Prospect Parks. I'm also a quilter. I make quilts for hospice patients. I donate quilts to animal rescue organizations and to botanical organizations for raffles and fundraising. I've been gardening at my home at Rockingham Road for 16 years. I spend hours each week, 10 months a year, cultivating my garden. I spend hundreds of dollars every year and over $1,000 in many years on my garden. I do not grow weeds. People stop my garden all the time to tell me how much they like it and how beautiful it is. This all started on September 24th, when Susan Soroji and Ann Lace published a rant against my garden on the Nextdoor website. I did not see those postings. I only saw the responses that several people who knew me then forwarded to me, and I never made any responses through Nextdoor. That was an error sheet in your information. This became a vendetta. And Susan Soroji and Ann Lees went about contacting their friends and getting them to write letters and come and complain about my garden. I have submitted to this group, and I hope you have had a chance to read the 5 letters from professionals in the field. As far as I know and have been unable to determine, Mr. Wilson has no horticulture education. or botanical education, neither does the chief. What they are calling weeds do not meet the definition of weeds under the ordinance, which is a weed is a plant that is not grown for any ornamental, useful, or edible purpose. All the plants in my garden have been purchased at garden centers and nurseries for their ornamental or useful or edible purposes. And therefore, by definition, they are not weeds. What people seem to be objecting to at this point is that my plants are standing in their dormant state with dead stems and leaves, and that I have a mix in my garden of blooming plants, of ornamental grasses, of ground covers, of flowering shrubs and trees. My front garden, and actually at this point, we could start looking at the little packet that says GAR, G-A-R. My garden is an intentional garden. A weed is an adventitious invader into your landscape. A weed is a plant that was not invited to grow in your garden, in your vegetable plot, in your agricultural field, or in your native landscape. It's a plant that was not wanted and not invited. All the plants in my garden have been invited and have been planted by me. You can see when the chief says, I didn't see a yard. Well, it is a yard. It's a large, the front of my yard is a large garden bed that is bordered by rocks, that is set off by a sweep of lawn that goes across the front and up the side. And that you will see in these pictures, I have garden ornaments, I have benches. These are at the front and the back garden. And actually this sign was given to me by a neighbor who liked my garden so much that she bought me this sign. It says, "A beautiful garden is a work of art." I have people come by with their children to learn about plants. I've helped students do science projects with the plants in my yard. And I have obtained certification of the National Wildlife Federation, the Monarch Way Station for a butterfly garden, and planting for birds from the Audubon Society. So this is not a weed patch, despite the allegations. This picture is a picture of the fact that I have borders around my beds. This is the backyard that is under my native beech tree. I would also like to introduce into evidence this article from the Courier Journal by Dr. Paul Capiello, at the executive director of Udell Botanical Gardens, from November 14th, that says why you should not cut your perennials down or your native grasses, that you should leave your stems and leaves and seed pods standing for wildlife. It is for beneficial insects to overwinter. It is for pollinator protection. It is to feed the birds. And it is to cultivate beneficial fungi and bacteria in the garden.
You want to make that an exhibit?
Yes, I.
Okay, if you can present that to me so I can put that, and that will be exhibit 13.
Normally, when you present an exhibit, you'd always give it to the other side, but we'll waive that in this case and
Okay.
make a copy of it and give it to the other side.
Okay, now if we go to the second packet that says my, these are photographs of the native plants in my garden that are being objected to as weeds. This is to illustrate their ornamental value. Their useful value is for the birds, the butterflies, the ladybugs, the fireflies, all the beneficial wildlife that we need. Okay, so you can go through them. There's the black-eyed Susans, the native irises, Helen's flower, slender mountain mint, plant. Partridge pea. Some of them, you can actually see the bees and the butterflies on them. Vernonia. You see the swallowtail butterfly on the Vernonia. Some of these plants are quite tall, which is what Susan Sorogi said, 4-foot tall plants, weeds masquerading as native plants. Well, they are native plants. And a lot of them are more than 4 feet tall. Some of them that grow in the back are quite a bit taller than 3 or 4 feet. So these are pictures of the plants that are now standing. My hibiscus in 3 different colors. These are the plants we're talking about, and my assertion, based on this evidence, is that these plants are not weeds. Okay, now, if you go on to the next packet, which is this one that doesn't have a title, that has just the pictures. These are other standing dormant plants around the neighborhood in other people's yards that look just like mine. Brown, tall, more than 4 feet tall, more than 7 inches tall. And these are just from one stroll on my morning walk with my dogs. Maybe 2 strolls. So if you're citing me for standing weeds more than 7 inches tall, then I think all these other people need to be cited as well. Otherwise, this is just, okay, so these are not weeds. These are plants that people are growing in their yards that bloom in their season, and then they go dormant, and they are beneficial to leave them standing for our native birds and pollinators. Finally, the little packet that says UDEL. These are pictures of the same plants that I have in my garden at UDEL Botanical Gardens in the display gardens. The first picture is of a native aster called snow flurry. These are the seeds. They're almost as pretty as when it's actually in bloom. So if you go through these are all in the display gardens at a botanical garden. So these are not weeds, but these are the exact same plants I have in my garden. I bought many of my plants at UDEL Botanical Gardens at their annual spring and fall plant sales over the years.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you have any picture of your entire front yard when everything's in bloom?
No, I usually take pictures of individual plants, and the different plants bloom at different times.
Okay.
So actually, if you go, I'm sorry, I stopped before I got there. Go to the very last few pictures. Oh, wait, they're not here. Okay, so I have plants blooming 10 and sometimes 12 months of the year. Right now, along the side of my garage, I have 2 camellias blooming and they will keep blooming depending on the weather. They'll stop blooming when it gets really cold, but then more buds will open up. They start blooming in November and they will bloom through January, February, and some years March. Starting in February in my front yard, I have daffodils blooming. I have the first daffodil, it's called February Gold, and it always blooms by February. I have the Christmas rose, Helleborus niger, that is named that because it blooms around Christmas time. So in my garden, I have plants that bloom almost year round. And I have plants that bloom until frost and after. So there's something in bloom all the time. There's not a particular moment in time when the whole garden is in bloom, because I don't use a lot of annuals. The only plants that bloom continuously as an individual plant is an annual. Perennials, they take their turns. But I have, everything I have, except, well, even the ornamental grasses are flowering, technically flowering, although we don't think of it as a flower. But everything in my garden is a flowering plant. Every shrub, every tree, every perennial, every ground cover, it's all flowering because that's what I do. Now, the exhibits of the letters, Dr. Margaret Torriero is Professor Emerita. She just retired from the University of Louisville Department of Biology. And she says in her letter, she was at my house in September. And she said that while my landscape is different from my neighbors, which consist of typical mown turf grass, shrubs, and trees with very few flowering herbaceous perennials, my yard and my backyard in particular are filled with a diverse selection of native herbaceous flowering plants mixed in with non-native ones. Even late in the growing season, her flowering natives were sustaining bumblebees and hummingbirds. And then Tavia Cathcart Brown. She's the executive director of Creasy Mayhem Nature Preserve.
Are these part of the letters that have
They
been
are.
already placed
They
into
are.
exhibits? So I
Have
have these.
you read them? Have you had a chance to
I've-
read
no,
them? Or
I've read-
Did you just get them tonight?
I think we've got some of these in advance.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we have all
We
of
didn't
these in
get all.
advance. We didn't get all.
Okay, she says, I could be brief and state without any doubt her plantings are useful and support a wide array of pollinators while also being ornamental. In fact, many of her plants are sold locally. However, please allow me to digress, and she goes on to talking about the importance, which all of these letters do, about the importance of habitat gardening and how we have to change our ways of gardening. And she actually offers with the mayor to work on changing the viewpoint and the attitudes about gardening for the city. Thaddeus Fry is also a very experienced biologist and horticulturist, and he's a neighbor. And he says the McGrails are doing Prospect and Louisville communities a great service by setting a good example to follow. Botanically, their yard is a pleasing sight. It reminds me of the many native species gardens in Maryland, Washington, D.C., Nebraska, and Kentucky. Their garden consists of both native and non-native perennial shrubs and trees, none of which are weeds.
Paul has a
Can I
question.
ask a question?
Yes. Yes.
How long has your garden been a work in progress? And have there been previous complaints in prior?
No, there never was any complaint. 16 years
Since we moved in.
since we moved in.
It's not a
16
problem.
years.
I was just
Yeah.
trying to get the
Yes.
timeline.
There's never been a complaint. I mean, every time I'm working in my garden in the front yard, people stop by. I had one couple stop by a few weeks ago. Well, it was a little earlier because there were still blooming plants. And they were coming to visit. They were a young couple in their 30s and they were coming to visit their father. And they said, they just loved it. They took a lot of pictures of the plants. They took pictures of my certification signs. They say, if we go to these, websites, can we get information on these plants? And I said, yes. And this happens to me all the time. And as a counterpoint to the realtor letter that you have, Joe Bishop, her house is here in your samples of other people's houses. She lives a couple doors down, and her letter is praising my garden. And she's saying that she sold a house in Shelbyville for over $1 million, and a major attraction was the beautiful natural environment garden that the people had. So that she thinks that gardens like this enhance property values.
Do you have a picture of that garden by any chance?
No,
Okay.
Do you know how many acres that property was?
no. And then my neighbor, Jessie Segretti, her house is also in this picture, and she writes a letter supporting my garden. She says, although she and I have very different gardening styles. Okay, so the purpose of this letter is to address the citation, blah, 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 blah.
Yes,
Okay.
So we have that letter.
Yeah, I
then
think you do.
Then we have read it.
So, as she says, they're not weeds or overgrown anything. And on the contrary, she is the most knowledgeable person I know when it comes to ecosystems and maintaining our environment. Just ask for a tour. She knows what and where everything is planted and what each contributes to the birds, butterflies, bees, insects, and of course the deer. Now, I do want to say something about, sorry, I had to laugh. When my neighbor, Steve, said that I was harboring moles and skunks and opossums. Well, if you live in this area, you know we have lots of skunks. We have lots of moles. Everyone's saying, oh, you know, it's been such a terrible year for moles. Well, the only difference is that I don't try to put poisons in the ground to kill moles. Because when you do that, the moles die, and our hawks and owls eat them, eat the dead moles, and they die from the poison. So if you use any poisons in your yard that then poison the food of other animals, you're killing up the food chain. And that's just a very bad thing. Am I harboring skunks? I don't think so. They walk across my yard every night. My dogs know when they're in the drain pipe underneath the driveway. They bark at them, but you know, I haven't put out a skunk house. Actually, I'm always welcoming to possums because possums are one of the greatest tick removers you can have. Possums are very attractive to ticks. The ticks get on them, and they're such meticulous groomers that they kill every tick that gets on their body, and therefore they help eliminate ticks from the environment. Coyotes, I don't think the coyotes live in my yard. I'm pretty sure I don't have a den of coyotes. So, and I do have baby deer born in my yard on a regular basis. We all do in our area. You know, so as for other nuisances, I think that's ridiculous.
I believe there might be people who would like to address the board tonight. I failed to say that earlier, so we'll get to you as soon as Ms. McGrail finishes her presentation.
Well, I think unless you have any other questions, I think I'm pretty much finished.
Do you have any other items to enter into this as an exhibit?
I don't think so.
Do any of the board members have additional questions? John?
How did you respond to Susan Soroji? Did you leave something in a mailbox or
Did I left her a note?
have a copy of it?
Suggested, educational resources.
I read it.
I questioned her motivations. You know, she was very unkind to me, and I did not respond as kindly as I might have.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of next door. Do you consider goldenrod a weed?
No, I do not. I have horticultural cultivars of goldenrod that are named garden varieties of goldenrod that are sold at Wallace's nursery, at the Plant Kingdom, at Frank Otti's. All my plants come from nurseries, garden centers, and plant sales at botanical gardens and places like
All
that.
of them?
Yeah,
So you don't feel like that your plantings in your yard attract undesirable wildlife?
no. I think they attract desirable wildlife.
Skunks are desirable wildlife?
The skunks are not.
The day we moved in, I saw a skunk and I've seen it twice. That was 17 years ago. We had no plants 17 years ago.
Oh, I take the dogs out at night, so I see skunks, and I see them all over the neighborhood.
Right.
And I had a friend who had them living under her deck,
Right.
and eventually she took her deck out and put a pad.
Are they undesirable though?
I don't think they're really undesirable. I think they're part of nature,
Okay.
and I think they have their place, and I certainly don't want them spraying my dogs in the face, and I try to do everything I can to prevent that.
So you took a lot of pictures of ornamental grasses that people have planted.
Yes.
Is it not proper to cut those back in the winter and have they had
You-
enough time to do that?
The actual recommended time to cut them back is in the spring. Because they provide shelter and benefits for wildlife, and that's why most of these things should be left standing.
A lot of people in my subdivision have ornamental grasses in the front
Back in the fall or in the winter.
corner of their yards and to
Yeah.
screen
Right.
cable boxes or electric
When I
boxes.
put my perennials back, once all the seed heads are, the birds have finished eating the seeds. So I've cut back a lot of the smaller plants in the front over the last couple of months because they were finished eating all the seeds and they were small enough so that they weren't providing the habitat. We have ground nesting bees and we have butterflies that spend their winter in a chrysalis on the ground, and they need to be protected from the open environment, and the stems of the plants protect them and save them. And, this is where they live. This is how they live.
So like a oak leaf hydrangea, I know you took a picture of one of those. Would you not cut those back in the fall?
No,
You would just let the stems go?
unless your oak leaf hydrangea is getting too tall and you want to shorten it, then you can cut it back.
Let me ask you, are you a PhD?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. On your certifications from Audubon Society in particular, what's the process for that?
You fill out an application, answering a lot of questions about your gardens for all of these certifications. They want to know what kind of plants you're planting, what kind of water sources you're offering, if you're using insecticides and herbicides. When, you look at our typical, and I really hope you'll look at some of the recommended references in the letters from David Wicks and Tavia Cathcart Brown and Margaret Carriero, because they are really giving you links to more information about this.
Do you understand why some people would object to that, your yard in an urban setting like this?
It's, a suburban setting. It's not an urban setting.
Well, okay, suburban.
Okay. I do, although I think, we are starting to really realize that the typical suburban landscape that's alien turfgrass is not native to this country, that is maintained with weed killers, bug killers, all these things, even if it's not, okay, let's start with one that's not even sprayed. Let's start with a turfgrass lawn with some boxwoods and some nandinas and some yews and some, God save us, purple barberries, which are invasive. These things are an ecological wasteland. They provide nothing to support butterflies, birds, bees, fireflies, ladybugs. And if you're spraying them, then they're a toxic wasteland.
So the Audubon certification, can we get back?
Yes,
What about bird houses? Do you have any bird houses?
I do.
Okay.
I
Blue
have a lot
birds?
of bird houses.
Okay.
Bird
I know
feeders,
that's a requirement for
bird
them.
baths.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a lot of those.
Thank you.
The other board members have any questions at this time?
I have some.
Okay,
Okay,
Chris.
in the ordinance, the word edible. Let's talk about what edible means.
Oh, sure.
Um,
I do grow some herbs and I have had a vegetable garden, although since my husband has had certain illnesses and disabilities, and he used to take care of the vegetable garden, I have not been growing tomatoes and things, but I have edible plants and they're certainly edible for the birds and the insects.
well, let me put it this way. I think you could make different cases on what it what it means. Some people would say, well, in a suburban setting, what edible means is a garden. It means tomatoes and green beans and that type of thing.
Right.
What would your reaction be to that?
Well, you don't have to necessarily consider, I do grow herbs and they are edible. So I do grow edible plants.
Do you eat the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I grow a number of herbs that I eat and I grow basil and I make pesto and I put it in the freezer and eat it all year. And yes, but really ornamental and useful. And the useful is useful to the birds and the butterflies and to nature and to supporting our ecosystem, which I think we all know is in a lot of trouble. And as long as we do the mow, blow, whack, and bag method of maintaining your yard, you're hurting the ecosystem, not helping it.
Okay. Next question. Do you grow any poisonous plants at all?
No,
How often do you weed your yard?
constantly.
You mean on a
Constantly.
daily basis or?
No, at least once a week I'm out there weeding. Weeding is actually one of my favorite things to do. I love to pull the bad plants. And I especially love to pull the invasive plants that are constantly seeding into our gardens. We have garlic mustard and we have the invasive Asian bush honeysuckles and we have some new ones, the carpet grass and the chafflower. And we have barberries and multiflora roses and as well as ordinary ones like crabgrass and, you know, chickweed and all these things. Yeah, I'm big time weeder.
Next question, in a suburban setting, what do you think this does to the value of houses adjacent or on the same street as yours?
My neighbor, the realtor, Joe Bishop, her house is, you know, one of your comparables, and she loves my garden and does not feel that it impacts this is her house. She loves my garden and does not feel that it negatively impacts the real estate. She's been a real estate agent for, I think she says 18 years.
Is her house adjacent to yours?
It's what, 2 doors down.
Okay.
And, you know, I understand that my next door neighbor sent a letter. He also happens to be very good friends with Susan Saroji and Ann Lease. And I think he was, you know, part of the vendetta.
That's, we shut John. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. We have 4 people signed up to speak. I would ask that you try to address your comments specifically to how the ordinance is and how the ordinance may not have been interpreted or is properly interpreted. What we are looking at tonight is not Ms. McGrail's credentials. It is not, you know, having a wildlife preserve or a garden, an all front yard garden. It is strictly up to the board to determine if the citation is properly given and if the garden meets the restrictions of the ordinance and the Kentucky Revised Statute. The first person is Susan Soroji from 7605 Rockingham Road. Susan? And would you step forward
Yeah, to the microphone.
and up to the microphone?
Susan Saruji. I am not here, I have a vendetta against anyone.
If you'll stand up closer to the microphone there so it can catch your voice.
I
Okay.
originally posted something to the website, the Prospect website, to complain about the yard. And there was a little button on the side that said, you're gonna put this on next door, and I'm not that familiar with it. So I pushed the button, and then within
Susan.
a couple of hours,
Can you stop me a second, Ron?
Oh,
There's a
little button
button
on
Sorry.
the top.
It'll go green if you do it.
yeah,
Thank you.
okay. So within a couple of hours, the comments became ugly and negative between neighbors, and I deleted the whole thing very quickly. I still wanted to make the complaint with Prospect, and within 3 days, it was a letter that she had sent me, there was a little confusion about this, a very ugly letter that I got back, and I can understand she felt attacked and she was, responding to it. But in my opinion, it's pretty clear what the ordinances are, and in the pictures that you see, especially the first one that I had posted and sent, I think you all have from September 24th, it's very clear to anyone who walks by. So it is not in keeping with the way Prospect has listed how you're supposed to keep your property. And it's just, I used to drive by, I still do, drive by it 3 or 4 times a day. If I ever saw a flower there, I would have stopped and looked at it, and never did it. Pictures that you have speak 1,000 words, I'm not a master gardener. I'm not even a gardener. I like a pretty yard like the rest of us, but she has a lot of credentials, which I don't think make any difference. If you look at the pictures, you can see what kind of garden it is, and I don't believe it's lawful. So that's all.
I think we may have some questions for you.
Okay.
Does the board have any?
No.
Do
question.
you think it negatively affects your property values?
Oh, sure. But I'm about 10 houses down the street, so not as much. And I lived here for 30 years and never made any complaints to anybody ever. And I was gonna let her yard, just let bygones be bygones until someone said, well, did you know she was the one making all the complaints to, about all of your other neighbors? I said, what do you mean? And I thought, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And that's what made me say, it's not right that I have to drive by this every day and just not say anything. I'm gonna finally make a complaint, and I did, and I it's not the way I wanted things to go. I don't like confrontations. And I certainly don't like vendettas. That's not who I am.
Okay, thank you.
The next person signed up to speak is Richard Gerlach. Yeah, Geddes.
Terrible left-handed.
Okay.
I'll use that excuse. We've
And
been
your
friends,
address?
is 6415 Deep Creek Drive. And, so Ken and I start, my first thing I would say is, I hear a lot of words up here tonight. I hear a lot of words I think some people don't like. It's not the majority. It's not us to decide who does and who doesn't. Some people, what if one person doesn't like what you do? I mean, then all of a sudden, you're gonna start to try to change that person because one person doesn't like it. I mean, when you say the word some, I have problems with that. And I'll start by saying that I've traveled the world for 25 years. I spent a lot of time in a lot of countries, a lot of times in China. And I hear things like this and it's concerning. It's concerning that Jacqueline can't do what she's studied and loves to do in her own house, in her own neighborhood. She pays her property taxes. She shouldn't have to be subjected to this tonight. To me, it's ridiculous. So I'll go on, I hear words of nuisance, nonconformity. When I think of words of educational and inspiration, you know, she takes my children around, I have two boys. They would never have any interest in gardening, any interest in plants. I said, we're gonna go over Jacqueline's and she's gonna take us around and show us about these plants, about gardening. We go around, she shows us all the plants. Loves it. She ends up getting our children books about plants. That inspires my children to have a garden box. Now we have a garden box growing vegetables that we give to Jacqueline and Jack because of what Jacqueline did for my children to appreciate those plants. In the fall, we drive by her house every day. We would go around to drive by her house to see the beautiful tree and all the plants that she has. The fact that people say she's harboring vermins, I guess you want to say, that golf course should get a citation every month if we're talking about moles. That's what causes the moles. It is not Jacqueline's yard. Actually, her yard doesn't have any moles. I go over there every day. I go over there every day with my dogs because they love to go to Jacqueline's yard. I have a mole hunter, okay? She's a bad mole hunter, but she does her best, okay? She never digs at Jacqueline's yard. She's trying to, on that golf course, there's a million mole tracks. And I can promise you I wouldn't be taking my dog there if there were a pack of coyotes. And I've never seen a skunk. I've never seen a possum. It's just not true. That's all hearsay. Show me a picture of a skunk or a mole in her yard. And by the way, if she did have one, it's not that she's harboring. It's that it's passing through to her point. What else do I have here? Property values. If I love gardens and I love plants, I'd probably pay 40% more for the house next door to Jacqueline's. So that's very subjective. You're assuming that the person buying that house is not going to like what Jacqueline does. If that person likes what Jacqueline does and you cater to that customer, you can get more for that house. And that's hearsay. I'd like to see any proof that any house near her has sold for less than what the stated values are. Because I just had my house appraised. I'm around the corner from Jacqueline. It appraised for more than I even think it's worth. So that's all hearsay. Just a lot of hearsay that I hear tonight. Conjecture, hearsay, subjectivity. The code itself, the chief did a great job reading the code. You can interpret that code in many different ways. But it's all subjectivity. Prospect, to a point, at times, is too green. It's too green, in my opinion, at times. And it's very, but to call her out and say, well, you're too green, or you don't conform. Well, I have bushes over 7 feet tall, or 7 inches tall, 7 inches tall. I have neighbors, I see their grass is high at times, they don't get citations. But it's just very, very subjectivity. What else? It's just a place we love to go to with our dogs, with our kids. And I just think that it's wrong. She had all these plants. How much money she spent on these plants? How can you tell her she can't grow them? I mean, like, oh, you got too many. That guy's okay. That guy's okay. Well, she's not. It's hard to do, and it's a tough thing for you guys. And I understand that you're just trying to do what you're up here to do, but there's just in my opinion, it's something that has inspired my kids, taught them a lot of appreciation for these plants and what they do. And my son loved the garden as a result. He's proud of what we grow, and he gives it to Jacqueline, and he's got a cactus. We take care of this cactus more than we do me. I mean, we got this thing in a pot, and we're bringing it in the winter, and we're protecting it. That's all because of Jacqueline. It's not because he had an interest in a cactus. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents worth, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next person signed up to speak is Christy Geddes at 6415 Beat Creek Drive. Okay.
I am coming off of laryngitis, so I apologize. My voice is going to crack. I've known Jacqueline for 14 years. When we moved in, she was one of the first people that we met. Her yard has always been like this. It's always been beautiful, and it's always had many different flowers and plants. And she does have flowers, by the way. There's no flowers, tons of flowers, and she gives them to me to plant in my yard. So that's a lot. She does a lot of flowers. Why all of a sudden is it a big issue? Why wasn't it a big issue 14 years ago, 15 years ago? I think she said she's been here 16 years. If you don't know Jacqueline McGrail, You should know that if you walk the trails in Prospect, she's the one who pulls out weeds. She does. She spends countless hours in our city making it beautiful. She pulls the weeds. She pulls the weeds at Udell. She pulls the weeds on the trails. She's the one that heads up. She heads up the flower walk. If you've ever taken the wildflower walk, that's Mrs. McGrail. She's the one that takes you around. My kids all of a sudden love this. I have no green thumb. None. Anything I need to know, I ask Jacqueline and I still kill it. But my kids love it. They love, like he said, my Joshua has a cactus, he's got a garden. And it means a lot to us because it's her influence. We don't have that. We don't have green thumbs like Jacqueline does. And so for someone to attack her yard, there's not weeds. I mean, this woman spends so much time and love in her yard. If you pass by her house, how can you not see her out there? I mean, she's out there all the time. And she helps the city of Prospect. She is an asset to the city of Prospect. You can, our town beautiful, our city beautiful, our trails beautiful. And I don't know if you guys are aware of that or not, but she does. I mean, so I think it's really awful that all of a sudden this is an issue. And I don't know why it's an issue, but it is, and it should be, because her yard's beautiful. Oh, people pay to walk through her yard for her to say what is planted there. So her yard is on a home tour, a garden tour. People pay money to walk through her yard. No one's paying to walk through my yard. Her yard, yes, my yard, no. So I just feel like it's an attack against her for some reason. And as far as next door goes, I was the one taken up for her and I was very polite about it. And I didn't see any ugliness going back and forth on that thread. I felt really bad when it popped up on my phone and I saw someone took a photo of her home and splashed it on that store. I feel that's a violation. I mean, I wouldn't want someone to do that to my home. You wouldn't want someone to do it to your home. If she had a problem with her home, maybe she could have walked over and asked her about it. That's neighborly. I've never complained about my neighbors. If I don't like something, I actually just don't even say anything. But if I didn't like something to the point where it offends me, then I would go to my neighbor and I would say, hey, look, what's going on here? Like, why is this going on? That's just me. But yes, I took up for her on that store, but I didn't see any ugliness. I just kept reiterating the fact that that's her passion. Nature is her passion. Prospect, when you move here, it touts nature and wildlife, and that's what she loves. She fusses at us because we spray our yard. I mean, she fusses at me all the time. We use mulch, for her, you're not supposed to do that. But, anytime she landscapes my deck every summer because I don't know what will survive heat or what attracts this or what attracts that. She's the one that helps me out. We go to Starview Nursery and she's the one that helps me out with that. And then also with Jacqueline, she digs up and, splits her plants in her yard. She sells them at Udell every summer. She sells her plants at Udell. People buy her plants. So for people to say she has weeds, you just need to understand what particular plant that is because it's not a weed. I mean, like she says, she loves pulling weeds. She does. She even pulls weeds around my mailbox all the time because it gets on her nerves when she comes around. She's pulling my weeds, which I'm thankful for. But yeah, I just, I really hope that you look at her yard and understand that her yard is her passion and it's her love. She loves it. She loves nature and wildlife. And so I just hope that you take the time to really look at it because it is a very beautiful yard. Some people, it's not their cup of tea, which I said on next door. It's not your cup of tea, that's okay. But you can appreciate what she has there and learn about it before you talk negatively about it. So thank you for your time. And sorry about my voice.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak and the last signed up to speak is Howard Harding, 6209 Deep Creek Drive.
Good evening, I'm Howard Harding.
I'm not even a neighbor, not even close to her. I live in on Deep Creek Drive. So I guess I'm speaking as a resident of Prospect, and not necessarily as a neighbor, but I drive by her yard and I guess after listening to her speak and all her degrees and everything else, I guess I have to appreciate her zest for nature. And I, as a non-degree person, have a great zest for nature, but I think I keep it under control. I have the butterflies coming my yard. I have the bees. I have all the things that she thinks is important. But I don't have what I consider a distraction to my neighborhood. And maybe I'm not in tune with her philosophy of what nature should be. But living in Prospect and looking at our yards and how I think we are kind of a structured community and should continue to be a structured community, we should maintain those ordinances. I remember maybe about 10 years ago, a neighbor near her across the street put a vegetable garden in that some neighbors complained about, and city council or whoever was in charge at that time had them take it down. That was under Joe Kilbrick's reign when he was mayor. And I think we ought to keep those same guidelines intact. And she definitely is outside of those guidelines. Whether the community wants to set those guidelines or not, that's, I guess, out of my realm or responsibility. But I think she is outside the realm of what Prospect should look like. If you know, more power to her if she wants to go out to our parks and grow all these things that are not intrusive to our neighborhood or to our neighbors, more power to her. But I think she's over accepted bounds of what Prospect should look like. So that's just an opinion, not a neighbor. I don't even know the lady, and but that's just me as a Prospect resident and how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
I have one question. The case that you referenced where someone had a vegetable garden,
Yes,
was asked to have it removed. Was that in the front yard or in the
it's
back?
a side yard, side
Side
yard.
yard? Thank you.
Could I say something about that case? That case led to newspaper articles, television segments that cast Prospect in a very poor light, and the city council changed that ordinance. The issue was not that her garden was located in the side yard. The issue was that she had put a little fence around it to protect it from the deer, a purchased ornamental metal fence. And after that case, first the woman sold her house. She was so put out and had such a bad experience with Prospect over that she sold her house and moved. But Prospect changed that ordinance to allow you to fence your plants to protect them from deer because of that case. So that was not a case where that rule was upheld. That rule was changed based on that case.
Thank you for the clarification.
We've had one other person sign up, and then this will be the last one for the evening. Bill Laise, Laise,
Yes, ma'am.
7604 Rockingham.
Yes. Hi, thank you for entertaining my discussion tonight. You know, the way I look at this is that hundreds, literally hundreds of houses in Prospect spend time, effort, and money to keep their houses up and to live within the ordinances. And we're proud of it. This is the only house that I know of in Hunting Creek that has been allowed to do this. It upsets me every day when I drive by. But, you know, as I've told, you know, I've made comments that, you know, some people you upset, you might get an angry letter. Some people you upset, you might get a riot in the streets, you know? And I'm one of the guys that really doesn't raise a lot of cane. But when she, you know, and everybody talks about Jackie in these glowing terms, Well, read the letter that she wrote to Susan Shiroshi, her neighbor. Read that. That'll tell you what you need to know about this single yard in our neighborhood. I mean, to me, that was mean. It was angry. It was selfish. And that's why I'm here. Because when I read that, when I got a copy of that letter and read it, I said, I'm not sitting on my hands anymore. And it's clear to me that the intent of the ordinances are not to allow this. I have no vendetta against you, Jackie.
My name is not Jackie.
Oh, sorry. Jacqueline?
Mhm.
Okay, sorry. I apologize. I don't hold that in my heart. That's not me. But when she wrote that letter, I was getting out of my chair and I was going to say something about it. Secondly, I would like to know what the protocol is on the ordinances being enforced in Prospect. Because as it stands now, we're kind of making enemies of each other. You know, we've got this side and that side. And, you know, one of us thinks that this is okay, and then, you know, the other side thinks that it's not. When it seems to me that and I don't know anything about this, but it seems to me if we have ordinances that the government should take care of those ordinances and kind of leave the people out of it. Maybe that's not the way it should be. It is, and maybe we should form a homeowners association. I don't know. I've never been involved in government whatsoever. But I just think when you look at the overall neighborhood and the way people keep their properties up, this should not be allowed to stand. Thank you.
Let me answer one of your questions or your observation. This is the first meeting of the Code Enforcement Board.
Oh.
The reason is that the previous code enforcement officer and the present code enforcement officer go out of their way to try to mediate situations and to have people work together and to have neighbors get along. And this is the first time, I guess, that their good efforts have failed. And the first time it's been necessary for us to have a meeting like this. And it's disconcerting to us, it's disconcerting to you, it's disconcerting to Jacqueline and Jack. But unfortunately, you know, here we are. But to answer your question, in the past, we have really concentrated on trying to mediate disputes among neighbors, and we've been very, very, very successful at it.
Okay. Okay, good.
And let me clarify for that is we have had a code enforcement board for a long time. Most of the folks, I think everyone except Paul, is new to the code enforcement board at this time. That's why we just had an orientation last week to prepare for this. There has not been a need for a code enforcement board meeting for over 2 years. And I think, as Chris said, I think it's the feeling of the mayor and the council and certainly the code enforcement board, and we have even recently updated some of the codes to give the code enforcement officer a little more leeway than they previously had in working with the neighbors to resolve things so that it doesn't have to come to the code enforcement board. So if we're just trying to answer the question there that you had asked about the procedure and the concept from it. So that's our desire, is that we can try to resolve things in a peaceful manner as quickly as possible.
Good. Thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just want to say that when I tried to discuss this issue with the code enforcement officer to explore what the concerns were, I got nowhere. I got no response. I got ignored until I was cited. So there was no effort to in any way mediate anything. And my understanding, and from the citation that I have, the citation is that I have weeds. So this is not a popularity contest. It doesn't matter how many people may not like my garden. The question is whether my plants are weeds. And I've submitted 5 expert opinions that my plants are not weeds. So however many people who have their own feelings, that's not really relevant. The question is, are my plants weeds? That was what I was cited for.
And
Okay,
that was
Actually, it's
presentation
excessive
you
growth
made.
of weeds, grasses, and vegetation. So it's not just weeds.
The code is what's relevant.
Correct.
let
For
me-
us, it's the code.
let me ask you,
Then you have a goal. I mean, that's what you're, which is one voice here. I mean, it's.
Jacqueline,
Okay, you got 3 back. So, look, we can have a vote. That's ridiculous.
Jacqueline,
You know, this isn't a popularity contest.
let me ask you, is there any possibility of resolving this with your neighbors?
In what way?
Are there things you can do to make your yard look better?
I think my yard looks great. And I think a lot of people think my yard looks great. So, you know,
There's at least 200 people come there from all around Kentucky and other, just a viewer,
yeah, I have garden tours, several
Tours.
garden tours in
week
my,
after week after week.
in my garden every
People taking
year.
pictures.
Horticulture societies, plant societies, garden clubs.
What does that mean?
What's that mean?
Could you do something about people yelling out there?
You know, that kind of attitude.
Well,
That lowers house values because.
Take
that
control of the
attitude,
meeting.
Hey,
People not want to move.
you've had your opportunity to speak. You have signed up. We're not having a debate amongst the attendees tonight. Everyone is to address the board. We've heard your comments in your presentation. Do the board members have any other questions at this time? We have been given prior to the meeting some of the information in an attempt to be prepared, but we have received much more information tonight that we did not have an opportunity to preview before the meeting. And so in the interest and fairness to all concerned in both sides, I would like to suggest to the board that rather than making a finding on this tonight, we schedule another meeting and give ourselves some opportunity to go through this more in depth.
Need a motion.
Do I have a
You need a
motion to
motion.
table
I
a,
move that.
okay, do I hear a second? All in favor? Aye. There being no further business to come before the board tonight, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
For German.
Motion for adjournment, second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion passes. Okay, all of these exhibits. What should I do?
Keep them right now.
Okay, right now, okay, yeah, because I gave up. It's maybe they're right. Okay, so I'm.
We meeting again.
Budget commission.
We need to get discussed. It's going to be.
Yeah. If we